Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my podcast. It's day 2 of podcasting. So, I guess we can expect, another 8 to 10 more episodes. I've decided that I'm just going to do the whole season, this week. So, just to kind of get it done with. And then, then I never have to do it again. It's the journey of the podcast is one of, peaks and valleys, and I hit that peak, the pure endorphin rush of recording a ton of podcasts in one day. And now it's in the valley of what the fuck am I doing with my life? So yeah, I just wanted to give you guys a little update on where I am and where you are right now, in relation to me as my dear listeners. So, but yeah, no, I thought, okay, well, I woke up and the Tamagotchi is doing pretty well, and the ceiling is not really changing. So I might as well record a new podcast for you guys, since I know that you've been eagerly anticipating this. So yeah, here we go. What do you guys want to talk about today? I was thinking to myself, like, is what I'm doing? Is it propaganda? Am I a propagandist? Am I doing propaganda? Like some sort of maybe like anti-U.S. American propaganda. There's no clear answer to that question. I think that there are some people who would listen to what I'm saying and be like, yeah, of course, obviously it's anti-U.S. propaganda. America actually is a really fucking great place, and you seem to suggest to your viewership, guy with a mic that it's not such a great place, and insofar as it is actually, a great fucking place, then it must be propaganda what you're doing. I understand that point of view. I could see how some people would be like, oh, you fucking anti-U.S. propaganda. But, on the other hand, I was thinking, like, well, if it's propaganda, then, like, really, like, who's it for? Like, whose interests are at stake here, right? Like, who am I, in whose pocket am I? And the answer is, well, I'm not really in anybody's pocket, since, well, I'm basically doing this pro bono, support me on Patreon. And I'm definitely not owned by any of the major news networks. There's no real conflict of interest here. I could say more or less anything that comes to my mind, and whatever I say, will be, if not necessarily true or factually accurate, because I don't have access to all of the facts. I'm not a deep state insider, with classified, clearance or whatever. But, totally accurate or not, anything I say is authentically my opinion about it. I'm not beholden to anybody. I'm not being asked to, make a point, in order to, secretly support the interests of some group, except, maybe George Soros, right? I do receive, a regular paycheck from George Soros, like all leftists do. So, maybe there's a little bit of that there. But I think, that, I don't know if that disqualifies this from being propaganda, but it definitely makes it different from the more obvious propagandistic, outlets like, Fox and CNN and MSNBC and even New York Times and, groups like this. So, and also, like, how am I supporting myself? I don't have to like change the content of my message in order to appease advertisers, for example. It's not important to me that that I get, that I maximize viewership in order to get better sponsorships from advertisers. I mean, not yet. I'm more than happy to sell out at some point if that's in the cards. As soon as I have like a major viewership and Coca-Cola comes to me, it's like, hey man, why don't you plug Coca-Cola all the time? We'll give you fucking like $1 million bucks to do it. Then yeah, fuck yeah. Then I'll whore myself out to this dirty Coca-Cola and love every second of it. I'll drink Coca-Cola until my teeth fall out, man. If you pay me $1 million a day. No, okay. I mean, first off, that's not really something that we need to worry about at the moment. And second off, yeah, I mean, until that happens, you can't really make a claim that I'm watering down or somehow, twisting or changing my message in order to appease, advertisers who are really the ones with kind of the decision-making power standing behind me. I mean, the only entity I'm advertising for is my podcast. The whole podcast is actually just an advertisement for the podcast. So, also, like where am I getting my information, right? I mean, this is maybe one of those where you could claim that what I'm doing strays closer to something a little bit more propagandistic, right? I mean, where are my sources? I mean, at least I'm not in some sort of, close relationship with, the great, powerful institutions. I mean, I'm not getting any of my information from like the White House, press secretary, or the FBI, or police, statements on things that I'm supposed to sort of read to you verbatim on the news. So. But on the other hand, I mean, it's not that my sources aren't questionable in themselves, and I mean, it's an interesting question about like what makes a source questionable. Is there any sort of like criteria, something like black and white, some sort of like cheat sheet for like deciding the credibility of a source, right? And because it's one of those things where it oftentimes perhaps works out in the exact opposite of how you would expect it to work out. You might think, well, the White House press secretary, the FBI, these powerful and storied institutions, they have, by virtue of being so powerful, they have credibility, right? Like, I mean, if NASA gives us information about space, then we should be inclined to believe that information because NASA is the authority on space. Likewise, if the U.S., if the president's office gives us information about political events happening within the United States or abroad, then we should be inclined to believe that information because, I mean, that's the group that we have chosen as, the American people, the U.S. American citizenry to fulfill exactly that function, to inform us and to make, appropriate decisions in that thing. But I think that it ends up being quite different, that, once you've elevated these institutions to a certain level of power and influence, that they thereby somehow lose credibility. Yeah, and they lose it because, it's almost like they've let themselves be captured by their own ideas of what is right and good and what sort of means justify the ends. Yeah, they say, hey, listen, I've been given a sacred duty by, as a duly democratically elected official to serve the interests of the people. And of course, it's difficult for me to know exactly what those interests are, but I believe, that those interests are A, B, and C. And even if everybody would disagree with me, even if the vast majority of the people who duly democratically elected me would say, no, wait, those aren't my interests. longer work weeks and less, less democratic control of the workplace, and destroying unions. That's not what I want. No vacation and bad healthcare. Why would I want that? But it's like no. I'm a powerful, wealthy individual, and I'm also the president of the United States of America, and I think I know what's best for you. And so, I'm gonna build a narrative to try my hardest to convince you that what I think is best for you is actually best for you. And I mean, isn't that kind of the most central aspect of propaganda? And then, of course, this narrative is repeated by news entities and the people who are sort of the people who shape public opinion. So that's not me. I have no relationship with powerful groups. I don't get any information from the FBI. I get like negative information from QAnon, since I just basically read QAnon and then disagree with everything QAnon says, because I think you can just start from a place of disagreement with QAnon and sort of almost automatically be correct in that. So yeah, so is it propaganda? Is it not propaganda? And I might get a little bit of pushback from people about some of the things that I say. I've listened to my podcast now, 30, 40 times. And, it gets worse every time you listen to it. But, yeah. And, I think definitely there are moments where, people who I sort of imagine would be my audience would be like, oh, fuck, it's time to cancel this motherfucker on Twitter, And insofar as that would, like, also shape the things that I'm saying, like, oh, God, I have to like, I have to signal, my ideological purity to the radical left, so therefore there's certain things that I'm obligated to say, then, maybe you could say to that degree that I'm also a vehicle for radical left propaganda. But I, like I said before, I have no intention of getting on Twitter, and, I find Twitter to be a highly confusing and rather, uncomfortable place. So, probably the only real flack I'm going to get is from my mom. and motherly propaganda, who was really pulling the strings, throughout all of our lives, the conspiracy of mothers, I guess, is what you could, be a great, metal band name. So yeah, I'll let you decide. I'm not gonna tell you what to think. Is it propaganda? Is it not propaganda? I'm critical of the United States, and I think that there's good reason to be critical of the United States. It's like the United States was sort of founded on a number of principles that I would be very inclined to agree with, principles about liberty and freedom and pursuing one's idea of happiness, and I think that, making those principles, central to, the political association maybe, but at least to sort of the story we tell ourselves also internationally, that these are the things that we should value. I think that was, that's definitely a good thing. We should definitely value liberty. Liberty is awesome. We should value that. Freedom. We maybe should think a little bit more deeply about what exactly it is that we mean by freedom. But absolutely too. It's better to be free than enslaved. But in spite of these lofty principles that the United States was ostensibly founded on, the history of the United States has been a history of, to some degree, betraying those very principles. And I mean, if you're going to give it the most sort of generous reading, you would say, well, the United States, it started with these principles and then it implemented them poorly. It said, all men are created equally except for the slaves, which are only, 3/5 of a man, and definitely not equal. And also, women, no voting for them because, can't trust those, those histrionics or whatever it is, and then over time, those principles have been better, developed and placed and worked into society. Women gained the right to vote. Slavery is abolished. We work towards ending segregation. And each step has been one towards the better realization of those core principles. But I think that would also miss a lot of other ongoing historical examples in the United States that have seen, the trend in the opposite direction. I mean, look at the Vietnam War, right? Like the Vietnam War was really fucking awful, and this is, okay, there was, this is, at this point, women had gained the right to vote in the United States. Perhaps segregation was still going on, but it was in the process of being, at least officially, abolished. And you might say that, the United States was experiencing a period of positive progressive change at the time. But simultaneously, the United States decided, hey, we're going to fucking invade Vietnam for some reason, and then we're going to test out all of our chemical weapons on the people that we're ostensibly protecting. Don't forget that, Agent Orange and all of these chemical weapons were dropped on the South Vietnamese. It wasn't the North Vietnamese, the ones that we were at war with. It was the South Vietnamese, the ones that we were protecting against the North Vietnamese. They were the ones who were like, hey, let's see what happens if we drop this bomb on this village. What does napalm do to a farming village? Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. And now the Vietnamese are going on to their third generation of horrible birth defects due to the effects of these chemical weapons that were used against them. And this seems to very clearly betray any idea of progressive momentum, and that legacy is something that the United States has then, again, of course, never really owned up to, much like all of the other legacies that are quite awful in the United States. And, and then, of course, most recently, you have this very scary development towards, fascist adjacent, political memeing, right? And if we had this really solid, principled base, foundation, liberty and freedom and these sorts of things, you would think that, movement towards less liberty and less freedom would be sort of already ruled out. Yeah. But the fact that it's not, the fact that we are constantly, on a kind of edge and with kind of the wrong move or the wrong president or the wrong words used in the public forum, we could tip over into something that's totally contrary to these lofty principles on which the Union is founded, seems to suggest that maybe these principles don't really exist at the heart of the U.S. political project. Yeah, and if it's not these principles, if it's not these good things, that underlie the United States, then what is it? Then what do we have to be so fucking proud about? And it seems that one side has decided that our pride lies in sort of abstract, just a bunch of words divorced from meaning. We say, oh, the United States, freedom, the freedom loving, but without any sort of concrete idea about what that freedom means. here's a question: is freedom a zero-sum game? Like if I have more freedom, does that automatically mean that somebody out there has less freedom? And I mean that's a difficult question to answer simply because the terms are ill-defined and we're talking on a sort of abstract and it's just sort of not really clear, right? But I think there are some examples we can think of where freedom is indeed zero-sum, and that would be if you would compare the freedom of, say, business owners or corporate managers or corporate owners to the freedom of, laborers and workers and employees, right? Because those two freedoms are at odds with each other, So, if the and I think, so for example, if you increase the freedom of a corporate owner, you will sort of thereby decrease the freedom of the people that owner employs. Yeah, because increasing owner freedom means, exactly letting them come up with, more or less draconian, rules about what their employees have to do. Yeah, so if an owner with complete freedom would say, my employees have to work, every waking hour of their lives, and they will be paid, 15 cents an hour for this. Maybe there's, or maybe not even paid at all. The owner says, you're now my fucking slave, and all you do is labor for me. And that would be complete freedom for the owner, and zero freedom for the employee. And similarly, if you were to give the employee, complete freedom, then the employee would say, well, I'm the fucking owner. No, I mean the employee would say, yeah, well then I have the freedom to have as many vacations days as I want, the freedom to get paid as much as I want, the freedom to be sick as long as I want and not risk losing my job. These would be the freedoms that the employee would enjoy, right? So these two ideas of freedom, go, are opposed to one another, and the, I think that if you were to really have conversations with most U.S. Americans and likely most people in the world, and really try to tease out what about freedom, what is freedom and whether or not they think that freedom is good or bad, I think that, given certain definitions of freedom, almost everybody would say, yes, of course, I am for freedom, But it's a bit ironic that the conservatives in the United States, who love freedom more than anyone, I mean, at least, if you look at their sort of rhetoric that they use, are also the same group that for whom the freedom seems to be more of the freedom for the owners than for the workers. I mean, they don't want, measures that would mean, better circumstances for workers, and how they get to that opinion is also an interesting question. I mean, some of them are probably themselves owners, or at least, beneficiaries of the kind of freedom that supports owners more than employees. There are people who say, well, my fucking, shares will decrease in value if we move towards a corporate, norm, including better worker protection and, more influence and power for collective bargaining and unions and things like this, and so therefore it's in my interest to vote Republican, And I think that a lot of those people then also have an interest in convincing, because those people don't make up enough of the country to get what they want. They have to play a different sort of game. They can't simply rely on the spontaneous agreement of the educated spontaneous agreement of enough people to push their policies through. They either have to engage in sort of targeted lobbying, to politicians, so that the politicians make decisions that are favorable to this class of people without actually having to go through any sort of democratic mechanisms to get there, or they have to, try to convince a large number of people, that these interests, the interests that support this sort of wealthy owning class, are actually also in the interests of the people that they employ, and then they have to, use some rather dirty tactics to get there. They have to say, hey man, if we don't give the wealth more money, there won't be any jobs for the poor. The wealthy are job creators, and the less taxes they pay, the more money they have automatically. The greater number of people will have jobs, and you should really just be happy to have a job at all. And the circumstances of your employment, the conditions of your employment are secondary to the great, to the fact that you have a job at all. So if you elect the other guy, who wants a bunch of socialism, just like the fucking communists, which means you're going to end up in death camps, but if you elect him, then you're going to lose any chance that you have at gainful employment. You're going to lose the job you have, even though you're basically making any money, and it's all going to be because the rich are going to be, made to go to the poorhouse, and yada 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 yada, and then these people, of course, have to sponsor big media. I mean, there's, you oftentimes hear about the liberal or the leftist bias in media, and there is in some media outlets, but I mean, there's a lot of fucking media out there, and some of that media is definitely, right-wing media, places like Fox News or Breitbart, and there's, just a ton of other examples. And these organizations are beholden exactly to those people who want to convince, as many people as possible that their interest is the interest of the wealthy class. Yeah, that these two interests, come together, are sort of, are one and the same. Yeah, and that's why, of course, these organizations are organizations of propaganda. More than you could ever say that my podcast or many podcasts, could be called propaganda. Mine might be, critical of the United States and might, make errors and mistakes from time to time. But I'm not, trying to push a certain way of thinking onto people, for the interests of a group that I'm not making those people aware of. There's no shadowy group standing behind me, pulling my strings and telling me, that I need to say certain things in order to pursue a certain kind of agenda. And so, yeah, anyway, that's why I like Germany. In Germany, you got the freedom to drink beer on the street and get as sick as you want, and those things, I mean, Americans are like, oh, but my guns, and it's like, yeah, dude, I mean, guns are great. Awesome. You can like have a gun, you can like stroke it, you can cuddle up with it and be like, oh, my sweet, sweet gun, but in Germany, on a nice summer's day, of which there are few, I can pop open a cold beer, tall boy, straight out of the can, and I can walk down the street, after work, on the weekend, through the park, just through the city, and I can drink my beer in total contentment, and nobody's going to come, no cop is going to come and say, hey man, you're not allowed to drink beer on the street, It's fucking great, And if I work at a company and I get sick, like real sick, not just like a couple little sniffles, but like real sick, then that company can't fire me for it. I can be as sick as long as I want, and the company will continue to pay. At some point, the insurance will step in and pay me instead of the company, and they'll pay me a certain percentage of what I would have earned. But my job is still secured for me at that company indefinitely. I could, go on a 3-year battle against cancer and come out on the other side victorious, and then go right back to work. And I think that is a kind of freedom, a kind of freedom to get sick and not to be then tossed out, because you're sick. And yeah, anyway, so freedom is something that we need to that we need to talk about. And on the topic of freedom, what about freedom in the time of lockdowns, right? Because the thing that we're hearing more and more from anti-lockdown people is that this is some sort of gross, a violation of their freedom. And I mean, on a certain level, that's accurate, right? On a certain level, yeah, sure. Being trapped indoors all the time is absolutely, I mean, of course well, I mean, are you trapped indoors? I mean, no, of course you can go outside in most places. There's stories coming out of authoritarian places like China saying like, oh, and then they welded the door shut. But I mean, it's always hard to sort of sift through what's true and what's not, and what's a different kind of propaganda coming out of when they report on things like this. But in Germany, during the height of the lockdown, they had like Ordnungsamt, like order keepers, order bureaucrats. I don't know, order service people, order keepers. I think it's the best. Order keepers, and the order keepers would wander around to like public parks and playgrounds and stuff, and be like, "Hey, get off the fucking playground, kid. You're gonna want to get fucking COVID-19. Like, go home, or we're gonna cite you $50 for playing on the playground. And I mean, I can definitely see how that feels like a violation of freedom. It's like, well, but I want to play in this playground, and I'm not worried about COVID-19. So who are you to come with your uniform and your state power and to demand that I abandon the playground or pay a fine? And so so of course, to some degree, there is a violation of freedom. Even though, again, like I said in the very first podcast, I think that this is an extraordinary situation. It's limited in time, and that extraordinary situations demand extraordinary responses and behaviors, and that we're supposed to that it's obvious that doing something a little bit different is what's called for. But that this should not be made permanent in any sense. It would be silly if 10 years from now COVID-19 has passed, but children are still not allowed to enjoy playgrounds in Germany. But maybe there's been some sort of strange expansion of freedom, in some way, and I haven't really like fully explored this idea. So that's what I'm going to do with you guys. I'm going to explore this idea, right now with you guys. And I mean, what about this lockdown? Because are we not actually a little bit happy about it? Are we not actually a little bit glad that we're not at work? I mean, some of us are at work. There's lots of people who for various reasons were not sent home or could not do home office, or were essential workers, and therefore had to risk their own health and in order to ring up our groceries, but nevertheless still just get paid the same shitty wages that they had before, because they're essential workers, but they're also they're not valuable enough to give a fair wage to. Right, like the rest of us, can shelter indoors and try to keep ourselves and our family members, healthy and safe. But, the lowest paid among us have to fucking go to work because they're the most important, but also the lowest paid. Which really shows how we've, the kind of priorities that we've around which we've structured our society. But a lot of us were sent home. A lot of us were like, yeah, fucking global pandemic, we're all getting fucking sick. It's time for you to, go home and, either work from home, or if that's not possible, then just, be patient, and hopefully you can find another job. There it is again, Yeah, and hopefully you can find another job once we emerge out the other side of this pandemic, and I mean, of course, there's a lot of anxiety there, right? There's a lot of, well, how the fuck, what am I going to do? How am I going to support myself? How am I going to pay my bills? Rent is due, the guy I pay my rent to is, living it up in his fucking cabin in Aspen. But nevertheless, if I don't pay my rent to him, how is he going to pay the mortgage on the apartment that I live in? And I mean, God, that would be so awful for that guy. And I mean, he might have to sell one of his fucking Lamborghinis just to support himself for the next month, right? But yeah, so there's a lot of anxiety there. But isn't there also a kind of secret pleasure? A little bit of enjoyment. This wonderful excuse delivered, to us from the universe. Hey, guess what? For this short period of time, you don't got to do shit. And now, granted, you might feel really anxious, but I'm going to give you an excuse. Here is essentially the perfect excuse to stay at home, eat some fucking Ben & Jerry's, binge watch, the fucking Avengers movies from start to finish again, then hit up the Lord of the Rings movies, all the good stuff, and you can feel totally sorry for yourself, because why wouldn't you feel sorry for yourself in the middle of a fucking global pandemic, And yeah, and you're welcome, and I think, if you poll people, if you ask them, hey, do you think the lockdown measures and these more or less, draconian, measures taken to mitigate the effects of the pandemic, do you support them or do you not support them? And I think you find pretty consistently that the majority, and even the vast majority of people, the overwhelming majority of people, support these. And it's easy to say, to give as your reason for supporting these, a moral argument, like, yeah, well, I believe that the health and safety of people should be primary. That it's the morally right thing to do. Is to take rather extreme measures to, combat a rather extreme situation, of course. And it would be wrong or immoral of us to do otherwise. And I wish we didn't have to exhort to, authoritarian measures instituted from above by government, rules and regulations and the threat of fines and things like that. I wish people would just, do this automatically in solidarity with one another. But since they don't, since they've showed themselves unwilling to make these kinds of necessary changes in the face of a deadly global pandemic, then no, I fully support the government stepping in and making, and making the decision for us. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's also totally legitimate. Totally legitimate to it's true. It's morally correct. We have an obligation to preserve the health and the well-being. It's as far as we can. It's messy and there's no perfect answer and no perfect solution right now. But yeah, there's definitely an acceptable moral argument to be made there. But at the same time, maybe, there's a part of us that's thankful that we can do this and that we have a good moral argument that we can make for believing in it. It's like, yeah, of course, the right thing to do is to isolate, lock down, close schools, stay home, eat Ben & Jerry's, binge watch my favorite television. Yeah, that's the morally right thing to do, and I hate every second of it. I wish I didn't have to do it, but I also fucking love it, right? I also just love every minute of it. Like, I've never, since high school, I've never thought that I would be able to devote so much fucking time to video games, right? Like, it was like, I love video games, and I cherish the moments in the day that I can play some fucking video games, Call me a fucking loser, right? But, those moments I do indeed cherish them. And I mean, if you were to ask me, like, would you like to play more video games? No consequences, no strings attached. I would have been like, of course, if I could do it. But I also recognize I'm a fucking grown-up, man. I mean, clearly, I'm adulting all the way, like 100% mad adulting here, and I got to go to work, and I got to, I got mad bills to pay, and all of these sorts of things. So, in my free time, when I sort of can finagle a minute or two for myself, I enjoy myself playing video games. And I just had long accepted the idea that real deep week-long video game binges were a thing of my childhood, of my past, and there was not going to be anything resembling that anymore into the future. And then bam, coronavirus, pandemic, locked in, and it's like, well, what else am I going to fucking do? I'm going to get my goddamn binge on, yo. And then, I get my binge on. I have a good time, maybe too much of a good time. Maybe I've developed some, behavioral problems, some deep addictions that I'm going to have to work through, once these lockdowns open up again, but then somebody comes along and says, hey, do you support the lockdown or not? And I'm looking at my life, and I'm looking at, like, working 9 to 5 and a job that's not amazing, and, but of course, having enough money to support myself and having a cozy little home, life going on simultaneously. And then I'm looking at, like, lockdown life, which is like wake up fucking late, have ice cream for breakfast, play some fucking video games, maybe, take a walk in the park, I don't know, man, like, it's not so fucking bad. And it's like, well, and I get to do all of that with this wonderful excuse delivered from the universe. They got the universe says, hey man, I'm going to let you do all of this. And instead of feeling guilty or like you're fucking made bad life decisions or you're a loser, I'm going to give you the opportunity to say you're doing this because there's a global fucking pandemic, because there's a global fucking pandemic, right? And so then maybe I say, well, yeah, given the not so great circumstances, I'm 100% behind the lockdown. Yeah, let's keep it up. Let's keep going. Let's keep doing it, And I mean, and I recognize that this is not going to apply to everybody, and that it's also, an essentially a very selfish take, right? But I think it's also not entirely untrue. It's definitely not untrue for me. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm laying it all out there for you. There's definitely a part of me that has, thoroughly enjoyed myself during this global pandemic, and I think that there's some truth there for a lot of us, and that being said, I of course would have preferred no global pandemic. The enjoyment that I've derived from this time, I would have rather just not had it. I was resigned to a life where I didn't get a binge for weeks long on video games, and I was okay with that. That was fine. I was enjoying my life, and things were good. In fact, I think part of the point that I'm sort of struggling to make is that if there had been no global pandemic, and for whatever reason I had also managed to binge for weeks long on video games, right? Like, I wouldn't have liked that situation as much. That would not have been great. It would have meant that I had done something probably really wrong. I had made some really bad decisions. But the pandemic was outside of my control. And of course, the pandemic is tragic, and a lot of people have lost their lives, and that is incredibly sad. And I would have preferred to never have played video games again if all of those people who had died, could still be alive today. Absolutely. My short-term selfish enjoyment of questionable activities is in no way more valuable than the lives of the people that have been lost during this pandemic. And of course, and again, the best argument for, supporting things like lockdowns and mask wearing and social distancing and all of that, the best argument is the moral argument. And the moral argument is also true. It's also 100%, accurate and true and the best argument, but I think it's also okay to admit that there's this small part inside of us that maybe also supports the lockdown because it's a reprieve from an otherwise maybe not the best, life that we could imagine ourselves leading. That there's that we're getting an unexpected vacation, potentially permanent, one that includes a lot of of anxiety, and of course we have to social distance. Our support groups melt away. But fuck, man, did we not on some level need a little bit of Ben and Jerry's and binge watching, our favorite movies or our favorite video games? I don't know. You tell me. Maybe I'm just a fucking asshole. It's not impossible. It's not impossible that that the things I'm saying are just really fucking awful. And I guess that's also one of the fears of doing this podcast is like, man, do I have some fucking shit takes about things? It's like, hey, Chell, meet Chell, I don't know who that is. Meet Chell, the guy that, you live with in your head all the time. Turns out he's kind of a fucking nutcase, right? Like, who would have fucking thought, But, yeah, if anything, you gotta be honest. Honesty is good. Honesty's great. So yeah, and so I guess it's probably like 2021 for you guys out there, March 2021. I hope by the time you're listening to this, we've already solved the COVID thing, and we're all back at work, and I'm once again only playing a reasonable amount of video games, and practicing moderation in all things, and enjoying myself, as much as ever, I guess, and of course I wish the best to all of you and to all of your loved ones, and and I hope that none of us get sick and from this global pandemic, and I hope that we are able to regain some degree of normalcy in our lives. I was chatting with some random strangers on the internet, and one person was trying to convince me that of course this pandemic is a conspiracy theory, right? But his take was especially odd, because he was trying to make the point that it was a conspiracy theory to sort of deprive the wealthy, the elderly, of their wealth. Right, that the idea behind this was that the elderly have accumulated such a great deal of wealth in society that we needed a way to sort of redistribute or to draw that wealth out from the elderly, and maybe then I don't know if redistribution was actually a part of the conspiracy theory, but it was to basically go after the wealth of the elderly, and that's, of course, why the pandemic, is more deadly for older people, because, that's the only way to sort of, get at their wealth is to kill them, essentially, right? And I, I don't think that there's any truth to that whatsoever, but the funny thing is, it's like, okay, it is true, however, that the elderly have accumulated, and consolidated a great amount of wealth and power to themselves, and especially with sort of demographic changes that you see in wealthier countries, and you have this larger population of wealthy people, and they have a great deal of wealth and also a great deal of power. But of course, because the elderly people have the wealth and the power, it sort of would raise the question, if it's a conspiracy against the elderly, then who's behind it? Because the only people who would have the power to enact such a conspiracy would be the elderly, right? So anyway, yeah. So I don't know. It's not really exactly on topic, but just sort of felt like throwing that out there right at the end. And yeah, good. So yeah, I posted a couple of my podcast episodes up on the internet, and I'm sure all my friends are listening to them and waiting for the next one to come out. Really, really excited. And I think if probably like. If my friends are listening to my podcast, it's more or less just to like hear my voice, it's like, oh, I know that guy, Chell, Chell's so great, and sort of the things that I say are just kind of besides the point, right? I should just like sit here and just say random words to you guys so that you can feel like, you can just, relive those moments that we all had together back in the day, right? Because that was a lot of fun. We did a lot of fun. I just hope that I'm not like totally shocking everybody. It's like, oh my God, who the fuck, what did he become? Well, he used to be such a sweet kid. and now I have no idea. Anyway, I guess I can cross off the freedom to drink beer and get sick from the list here. I'll do that now. And I can cross off, are we not happy about the lockdown, or it's the end of the world and we love it? I can keep those. I can cross those off the list of possible podcast topics. But yeah. So, I think we should all do podcasts. I think we should just, have like an ongoing, constant podcast sort of culture where everybody just daily records a bunch of podcasts. And no, actually, no, I changed my mind now. No, that wouldn't make any sense because I have no interest in listening to all of your podcasts. But some of you, I would be more than happy to listen to podcasts. But yeah, so there we go. That's all I got. That's all I got for you guys. Now I just got to do a little bit of editing. Slow down the playback, and make me sound. Give me that good radio voice, and then hopefully you guys will listen and give a like, and and be thoroughly entertained by this project of mine. So all right, well, thank you very much for being here, and I hope to do another audio for you again real soon, and yeah, peace out.